Okay, welcome to the funding, experimentation, and innovation track. This one is, I think, really interesting because it talks about a deep incentive and like changing the core infrastructure of our society, which is fundamental to embed new values, get rid of maybe old paralysis. It was really exciting what we came up with in France. And so we're doing this new round with new existential hope scenarios that we'll put up together tomorrow to create a new vision, hopeful one, and to guide us to innovate and transform society, our institution, our social infrastructure, our dynamics, etc. But Martin is our first speaker today. So Martin leads Gordian Biotechnology, which is aging research venture, and that is, yeah. I think the thing that's really interesting about you is you're not just like an entrepreneur. You're really trying to map the full network of aging research, and you're also creating new incentives with the Indigenous grants, right? As well as other. Yes, talent bridge. Yes, talent bridge. Apprenticeship. So yes, that's super interesting because Foresight is also trying to make it so that non-US people may join DOs. Anyways, I think. Oh yeah, I can do that.
You can move closer.
Yeah. Actually, so yesterday when we met, Martin's request was like, let's not be boring. So that was the request for this session. But as you know, boredom is in the eyes of the beholders. So if this is ever, if the questions are boring, feel free to manifest yourself. This is a participative session and you're all participants. I have a few questions for Martin, but the second part is all your questions. So think about what is really entertaining here. My first question for you is, since we are talking about innovation, experimentation, what is, for you, like really novel, like in your own approach? Like, how do you feel that you are truly experimenting, bringing some new, some new infrastructure to society in what you're doing? And so maybe you can provide a bit of context.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Gordian Biotechnology is a biotech company, sort of venture funded. I think has very little to do with everything we're talking about today, but that is sort of what I spend 90% of my time on. And then the other programs that you described all happen within a nonprofit called Norn Group that just exists to have these programs. And so the longevity impetus grants, which I started, but now are being run by Lara Nushna, it's basically like fast grants for aging. It's let's give grants to academic researchers to do academic research the way it's more or less the way it normally happens, but with less paperwork and less delay, and with greater ambition. So I'll come talk a little bit more about that. Then there's this Talent Bridge initiative, which is basically like there's a bunch of aging stuff happening in the US in terms of labs and companies. There are a lot of people who are interested in this all over the world and who want to contribute. And if you're in some country that doesn't have like research infrastructure, it's less obvious, like, what do you do? And so the nonprofit is trying to serve as a bridge, basically identifying those people all over the world and then connecting them and helping out their sort of like visa process to reach the US organizations in the US. Then there's something called the Longevity Apprenticeship, which is basically let's train more people to have both good taste in aging science and sort of be able to guide efforts towards things that will actually be useful and not just like I don't know, either crazy or boring and useless, but also have some experience with how do you actually put something together, how do you make a thing, and especially a sort of multi-million-dollar, multi-person thing happen. What does that involve operationally and so forth? And then there's other stuff that is not live yet, so plus we have enough to talk about. So these are the initiatives. I would say the common thread for all of them is what seems to be a bottleneck for the aging field, and what is low-hanging fruit, where like something could be significantly better if you just did it a bit differently. And so I think maybe unlike some other people in the track, is like I'm not really trying to like reinvent and like go 50 years into the future and say like this is a totally different way things could work. It's more like I think we can do something right now that is significantly better than the way that things have been working. For instance, impetus grants, the idea came in June 2021, and then the program launched in September 2021. And then by the end of 2021, we'd given out 100 grants for like $20 million-ish to research in a bunch of labs across the world, basically, right? So it's like, we can do this extremely fast and it will be much better than what currently exists. So let's take that step. And then we can take additional steps from there, or other people can do things, or other people are working on more longer term things. Same with the mentorship program. It was basically like, oh, it seems like there are projects in longevity that some people are interested in funding. This was like, it was led by my experience of like, someone's interested in funding longevity stuff. And then they ask, oh, who should we talk to? Who knows about this? And then some of them end up talking to me and a bunch of other people. And then it's like, okay, here's the idea. And then the next, and okay, cool idea. Let's fund this. Who's going to do it? You look at me and it's like, I'm not going to pick my job. And then you look at, the person funding it, I'm not going to do it. So like, who's going to do it? And then I thought, well, I think I know I could do it, but I'm not going to quit my job. But I think I know what is needed to get to like do it. So maybe I can just like directly mentor some high potential individuals and help them sort of get supercharged into they could do it. And so it was just kind of like, here's a gap. And I think there is an immediate solution, which just requires like me to find some high quality people. It started with 3, there have been 5 people through the program. So yeah, that's the common thread, I think.
How do you, like you said, you're looking for people who have good taste, for instance, in like what is good biotech research, and like you're mentoring people, forming people.
Yeah.
Like, what do you look for? Like, what are the values that you're trying to like get reproduced and like emerge here?
One thing, so I always will interview these people, and one thing I really look for is, I'm like ruining my own interview process, but after this goes on YouTube, but it's like I ask you about something, and have you thought about it, like level 1 thought about it, and you have this opinion that would be like the consensus of like, if you follow everyone in aging on Twitter, this is your opinion, or have you gone beyond that and formed some of your own opinions?
Critical
right?
thinking.
Yeah, and just the tendency to go deeper on it. I think that's a really important thing. And just examining, not taking things as like blind faith. Like, here's a paper, they say this. And if you just accept like, yay, I'm excited, we're going to cure aging next year because this paper says this, either we're not, right? So I think that's important. And then, I have my own mental map of like, well, this is probably kind of not super rigorous, and this is quite rigorous, and so how well have they are they starting to reproduce it? And then the thing that many people lack, and so part of this longevity apprenticeship program was like a journal club where let's go through a bunch of papers, but like biology is very unfriendly, or academic research in biology is very unfriendly in the sense that the incentives are such that you need to have explained a lot to get your paper published in the best journals. And so you are incentivized to make it appear as if your paper explains most of everything, right? And I'm being a little bit harsh. Clearly, I support this research. That's why the impetus grants. It's like, we need more of this stuff. Like, we don't need just like, oh, we just need a bunch of not academics to come in and they'll fix everything and everything will be more beautiful. No, you'll just distort and pervert it in a new way. But so the paper will make a lot of claims, right? And there will be things that are reported, and what's not reported is like what went wrong? What did we try and it didn't work? That just like doesn't get published because the incentive structure doesn't allow it. And many scientists probably wouldn't want that. And so you end up with, again, if you just take all of that at face value, you think that the world is quite different than it is. The sort of bottom of the iceberg of things that aren't working is hidden. But if you read between the lines of the papers and you see like, you understand like, well, the next obvious experiment would be this, and it's not that hard, but it's not in the paper. They probably didn't do it. Sorry, they probably did do it and it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
So sort of thinking about those kinds of things is also, I think, helpful for like taste and like just seeing into all this, because biology is almost more like blacksmithing rather than like, here's the textbook and like you can just grok all the math and now you understand it. It's more like, well, you probably should add more of this. I can't tell you why, but it works better. Like there's a lot of that stuff, this implicit knowledge that's sort of hidden within the institutions, but it doesn't come out.
Yeah.
So how do you understand that it exists and then how do you look for it?
Yeah, super interesting. And I've looked a lot into DSci this year. So also thinking about like reshaping the way we do science and research. And I mean, I need to ask you this question because it's our prompt for the existential future. Like, what is, if you think about precisely what the best system could be, maybe in your field, or you can take it on a higher level, but for biotech, for research, for funding, what are the main sort of like criteria? Is it like collaboration? Is it a better sort of verification of scientific experiments? Is it people who are more ambitious or like more, let's say, ability to fund things that are entirely novel and maybe very risky and like less control of institutions? Like, what are the core mechanisms that make this system truly one that's extremely conducive to societal progress and flourishing?
So I think you always have to think of like, what are you optimizing for and what do you need to balance that? Right? So you could say we should fund more stuff that is very bold and could have a big impact. Because I think that would be one half of the answer is like, we should fund a bit less of like, this is a well-established area and we will do more research in this area because we know it is important. We should still do that. And also we should fund a bunch of just like whatever people are really curious about. Like the beauty of science is that there's just someone who's obsessed with like yogurt.
Yeah.
And then they find CRISPR or something, right? Like, so we should not imagine that we can like know upfront what are the right things, right? So, but we can say, and this is what we do with impetus grants, it's like, if this works as well as possible, will anything happen? Like, will anything change, or will there be a presentation at a conference and then everyone in that area will be like, that is interesting because like my entire brain is like consumed by the puzzle of how mTOR is regulated. And now I have one more puzzle piece and it's exciting to me because I'm like the nerd about that thing, but it doesn't change. It doesn't add a new session for the conference. This is our quality metric or sort of like our is impetus grant successful? Is how many new topics exist at conferences that were first funded by us. This is a long-term quality metric.
Yeah.
But so more like, okay, but what's the best case scenario? Like, let's fund things based on the best case scenario. But then what is the counter metric to that? It would be like transparency and rigor, like science working the way science is intended to work, which is that you explore reality and you accurately report what you are seeing, and other people can reproduce it. And so one big thing so I think that's a whole topic. One big thing there is just like all these negative results that are not reported, right? So like everything that's not working is not visible because there's no reward structure for like making those things visible, as opposed to if you're like, you're writing some code and then you put on a forum and then it's like, hey, this stuff isn't working. Does anyone have input, right? That hasn't really evolved into this, like, this is really collaborative in biology. Some of it is because it is very difficult to capture the metadata of what you're doing. You know, it's like, well, maybe it's not working because like it's 3 degrees warmer in your country, and like annoying stuff like that. And you don't know how to look. But some of it is not captured because there is no these publication blocks of like, here is a cool thing that is like, it's a whole package, and it must include like the narrative of why this is important, and it must include all the experiments. And you don't have like, you know, I did this, and here's my result, and here's what I think might be going on, but I'm not done yet. And then other people sort of like making citation references, not just to this whole paper as a block, but to like, this person was tinkering and got this result, and then somebody else realized that like, okay, here's CRISPR or whatever. Or like, more realistically, that is curious because I have this other model in my head, and like, now I'm going to follow up on that. So if we could sort of enable, because you need that maker, otherwise it's just a bunch of people moonshotting left and right, and like,
yeah,
all of it's going to fail.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with a lot of those points. Okay, probably we can make this question very non-boring, which is thinking about what could really, really go wrong. And when I think about biotech, I think it's one of the areas where there is the most opportunities for that, really. But more like, you know, how do you think about your own ethics also in going into this? Like, how do you, you know, think about what could be potentially like really negative outcomes? Do you mitigate for that in the way you approach your work? Yeah, so it's a bit of a double question. Like, what would be the worst case scenario? What for you? How do you like try to steer away from it?
Yeah. Like, I'm not too worried. I guess maybe that's a cliche answer to here, which is what I'm trying not to do. So, okay, so I was in an Uber after a gene therapy conference, and the driver was like, oh, is it true that pharma companies are creating gene therapies that are like selectively eradicating Black people? And I said, and I'm like, okay, I need to like step into a different world to answer this. But the essence of the answer is, without saying anything about, like, without saying that like nobody wants to suppress Black people, like that's probably true. But the way to do it, like biotech is pretty hard. Like, we're not like inventing all these gene therapy. Like we can't even do it, right? Like people can't do it. So like we don't have this stockpile of drugs that we're keeping from people. If we try, we can't even make a gene therapy where we have like, we know this is a person who is missing this one gene and we're trying to put it back. Like that's hard. We're struggling to do that, right? So it is kind of hard. And therefore, while there is opportunity to, like, you could totally create some virus, engineered virus that's like super powerful and like kills a bunch of people. A, we can already do that. B, like random person in garage will have a really hard time even making anything. So I think it's like, it's less risk of like, oh, suddenly you have a disaster. But I think what is worth keeping an eye on is like, we are sort of, or some people at least are pushing towards like, oh, we need a biotech economy, synthetic biology, all these things, and increase democratization.
Yes.
Right. And so I think it's worth thinking about, and this is where bioethicists should, like, instead of being like, whoa, slow down, right? Like that's it might not happen, whatever. It's just like put active effort into thinking about what are positive scenarios, right? Like what is the equivalent of like the App Store where different people are writing programs and then they're using them and it's like APIs and we're like building a thing together, which would really accelerate progress. So that would be good. But what does that look like where it's like not dysfunctional and it doesn't end up with like wanton like identity theft or something like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's very cool that you're mentioning this. That was going to actually be my question, because again, like when we try to decentralize science and democratize it, what does it mean? You know, what is the important thing, which is to, you know, if you put this in the hands of everyone. But I guess you just answered the question, so thank you. Well, in that case, I will open up the questions to you all. Any questions for Martin? Christian?
I always have millions of questions.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear more about, and I'll try to talk so you can all hear me. You mentioned about taste in in research. And so he's an expert, right? He's in the conference here. And then there's a lady who knows nothing about this, and I'm about halfway between, right? I know some stuff, but I'm not an expert. But I'm continually trying to judge longevity news that I hear about, right? Some of it is pretty mainstream and it's pretty easy to judge. But a lot of the stuff I look at, and I've got a lot of stuff you look at, is not that easy, it's not mainstream, it is not easy to judge. It comes out of some unusual country, perhaps, or from some university I've never heard of, or some little company somewhere doing something new. And so I look at a lot of that stuff, and I'm sure you end up looking at it for impetus grants and things like that. And I'm interested in comparing how I think about it and how you think about it. Okay. So for me, as somebody who do not have his level of science background, but I'm looking for innovation, right? I'm looking for exciting new ideas. So when I see something that, well, it's done by somebody who went to Harvard and works at Pfizer, it's like, am I going to get excited about this? I mean, I personally am not, because that's already mainstream. If that's exciting, the whole world already knows about it, right? This person has access to all the standard publication opportunities, funders, all these things. If that's good, it'll succeed without my help. These people do not need my help, okay? And if it's exciting, I'll hear about it in the New York Times eventually. So that doesn't get me excited. What I get excited about is some peculiar thing coming out of some unknown place, either by someone who's very young or someone in some odd country where they don't have really good connections to the scientific community, that worldwide one. And it also has to make a fairly dramatic claim. Okay, so not a little claim. Everybody makes little claims. It's like, oh, we have another exercise mimic. Great, we have other ones of those, or you could exercise, right? So I just don't get excited. What I get interested about, and what I try to steer toward, like impetus grants, so it can be truly evaluated by some people who know what we're doing, is someone in some obscure place with a huge claim, right? So, and I don't mind that it's huge and bold. I'm okay with that, right? That gets me excited. It might, 99% of them might be wrong, right? It might just be either mistaken or fraudulent, whatever. But there might be something really exciting there that would be overlooked by the mainstream. And so I can take those people and say, have you heard about the impetus grants? Because they will consider it. At least that's my impression. Is no matter where it comes from, you guys will look at it, which most people won't. I mean, it's just like, who are you connected with? I can't judge this. It's too crazy. So, do you get a lot of these like obscure, bold claims, and it takes real scientific expertise to figure this stuff out?
Yeah, we do. And so one of the features, just to describe how impetus works, so it's you send in like a 2-page grant application describing what are you going to do without all the like experimental details and stuff. You can have some preliminary data and what is the potential impact of this? Like, why does this matter? And then the reviews are double blind, meaning that the applicant cannot be identified. We have to like train them a little bit to make them not just like dox themselves, but the applicant cannot be identified in the first stage of review. And the intent here is exactly as you're saying, like, how do we not just sort of like pattern match to like, oh yes, Harvard is good, right? Like this is probably good, right? And so the interesting thing that happens is both ways. Some stuff from like top institutions were like, well, this seems not that interesting or not that clear, like let's not fund this, and then the vice versa. But then you still have to be able to do it. And I think that, like on average, a biologist at Harvard is more competent at actually doing this hard stuff than a biologist who's like, or someone who's not a biologist who technically could apply here, right? And some of them are really very sort of like, I'm just like eating the stuff myself and I have amazing results, right? And I have no data data. So we don't really want to fund that. So I think the implementing these things of like, how do you, having things like double blinded, and then also the way the reviews work is there's multiple reviewers who are all experts in aging stuff and or in the relevant technologies. Many grant mechanisms, it's an average score, right? So like, what's your total score? We sum up all the reviewers. So then what we probably want, which is what you're describing, is like bimodal scores, right? Some people think this is going to be amazing, and some people think it's good, like totally fake and terrible, right? And so we make the sort of like, who gets funded dependent on like maximum score rather than average score. So that's sort of concrete mechanisms where you can do this. But somebody has to love it. There's certainly a bunch of them where it's like everyone's like, this is garbage. And I'm sure we're wrong about some of those too, but like everything's going to be wrong about something. So I think those are two mechanisms. Then there is this like, is the person going to be able to carry it out? And that's really tricky because now we want to like ideas coming in from everywhere, but you know, some people just like get things done and some people don't get things done or get things to work or whatever. And how do you judge that? And in my normal life, one way that I try to judge that is like, I look at the person and I look at how truth-seeking they are, right? Like some people, they have their favorite pathway or whatever, their favorite thing. And it always is great, right? Like every time they talk about everything, it's always great. And then some people are much more sort of like, well, I'm looking at this critically, like going back to the apprenticeship, right? I want that person to like try a thing, because if it's BS, they're not going to like push it forward. So then now it's useful to know who it is, but it's by a different criterion than the other thing. So I think still pairing those things up. And so when we get things that are like, whoa, this seems really crazy, they do get unblinded later. And then it's like, we already thought that it's interesting enough that if this could work, then that's worth funding, even though it might, like 75% chance it's not going to work. And then if this is a thing, if this idea may have legs, is this the team to do it? So are they going to be able to at least overcome the technical challenges and sort of like be truth seeking? So that's kind of our model for how do we approach this problem. But of course, there is an intrinsic tension there. And to a certain degree, you should decide what is it you want to do with it. You know, do you want to fund 10,000 moonshots and like one works? Or do you want to fund, you know, like a bunch of moonshots and 25% work, but it's less world changing maybe, or maybe it's not. And we're sort of in the like target 25% high impact range. And then we've tried to design for that. We don't do phone calls. So we've done like 114 grants so far. We don't do phone calls with them, but in some cases, so one of the advantages of being like a small, flexible organization is that you can just break your own rule, do whatever you want, right? So normal grants, like here's what I want, you get it or you not get it, right? So sometimes the discussion of the grant is like, hey, they really need to do these experiments, otherwise this is not going to be good. And then it's like proposed to the people, hey, you need to do this, or like you really need to like partner with a lab that has expertise in this in order to get this done. So sometimes there's some back and forth, usually by email rather than phone calls, about this stuff. You could do that, and I know funders who do that, but then it's lower throughput, right? It's already like 1.5 person, or I guess plus the reviewers, but like less than 10 people trying to like review 600 grants or something in 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Okay, awesome. Is there any more quick question? Otherwise, this is the end time for this session, but okay.
The evaluators, I mean, I would say NIH has very senior research.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're all anonymous for multiple reasons, but including like we don't want the reviewers to be unable to apply themselves. So by them not knowing each other and it being double-blinded, they can do that as well. That's really hard. Like this is the hardest part of just grants, I think. At least when I was doing the first round. Lada may have a different answer now. But you want people who are optimistic about like things can be better, very knowledgeable about science, able to assess things, are objective and truth seeking, and aren't too wedded to their own expertise. Like this is the most important thing that I'm doing, right? So all those, it's very hard. There's probably only like 5,000 people in aging, and so each of those things cuts away 90% of people. So that's rough.
Are very busy people.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're perfect. We've been pretty decent at that. I think partly we're benefiting from like I have a lot of contacts, but so trying to find all those people, and they can be more junior and more senior, and we try to sort of mix it up. And many are academics and some are not.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Martin, so much for this session. Really super interesting.